The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people shifted in their seats, waiting for the judge to speak. Judge Richard Langley sat at his bench, adjusting his glasses and glancing over the papers in front of him. His expression was stern, almost intimidating, as if he had already made up his mind about the case before hearing a single word. Standing nervously in front of him were Marcus and Malik Johnson, identical twins who looked more like frightened kids than troublemakers. They stood side by side, dressed in their school uniforms, their hands clasped tightly together. The charge against them: vandalism. Someone had spray-painted graffiti on the walls of a local park, and unfortunately for Marcus and Michael, they were seen near the scene around the same time. The evidence was shaky at best, just grainy security footage that showed two figures walking away, but it was enough for the authorities to bring them in. Their parents weren't present because they didn't know about the hearing yet. The boys thought they could handle it themselves, but now they regretted that decision. Judge Langley cleared his throat loudly, silencing the room. "Marcus and Malik Johnson," he began, his voice sharp and commanding. "You're accused of defacing public property. What do you have to say for yourselves?" The twins exchanged nervous glances. Marcus stepped forward first, his voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, we didn't do it. We were just passing through the park after basketball practice. We didn't even see any graffiti until later when someone mentioned it online." Malik nodded quickly, adding, "Yeah, we swear we didn't touch anything. We wouldn't do something like that." But Judge Langley wasn't convinced. He leaned back in his chair, studying them with cold, calculating eyes. Then came the words that would haunt the courtroom. "Young men like you," he said slowly, his tone dripping with disdain, "should know better than to loiter in places where such behavior happens. You carry yourselves in a way that raises questions." The gallery erupted into soft gasps. Some attendees exchanged uncomfortable looks, while others shifted awkwardly in their seats. The twins froze, stunned by what they'd just heard. It felt like a punch to the gut. Was he really judging them based on how they looked? One woman sitting near the back whispered to her neighbor, "Did he just imply?" Her voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Even the court clerk paused typing, her fingers hovering above the keyboard as she processed what had been said. Marcus clenched his fists, trying hard not to let his emotions show. Malik stared at the floor, his face burning with shame. Neither boy knew how to respond. They felt cornered, powerless against the authority figure towering over them. For a moment, all they wanted to do was disappear. What none of them realized, not the judge, not the audience, not even Marcus and Malik themselves, was that this moment would set off a chain reaction far bigger than anyone could imagine. Little did Judge Langley know, the twins' father was not just another parent. He was someone whose influence reached far beyond the walls of this courtroom. And soon, the judge's careless words would come back to haunt him in ways he couldn't possibly predict. The courtroom doors swung shut behind Marcus and Malik as they stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. Their hearts were heavy, their minds replaying every word Judge Langley had said. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Malik broke the quiet. "I can't believe he talked to us like that," he muttered, his voice trembling with anger and hurt. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "It's like it didn't matter what we said. He already decided who we are before we even opened our mouths." When they got home, the twins hesitated at the front door. They knew their dad, Derek Johnson, valued honesty above all else, but telling him about this felt different. How could they explain something they barely understood themselves? Taking a deep breath, they pushed open the door and found their father sitting at the dining table, typing away on his laptop. Derek looked up and immediately noticed the tension in their faces. "What's wrong?" he asked, closing his laptop and giving them his full attention. His warm, steady gaze always made it easier for them to talk, but today, the words came out haltingly. "Dad," Malik started, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. We got called to court today." Derek's eyebrows shot up. Court? For what? Marcus took over, explaining the accusation of vandalism and how they'd been brought in despite having no real connection to the crime. As they recounted the events, Derek's expression shifted from concern to disbelief, and then to something harder, darker. When they reached the part about Judge Langley's comments, Derek's hands clenched into fists on the table. He said what? Derek's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill through the room. The twins exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen their dad look so angry, not the kind of anger that scared them, but the kind that promised action. Derek leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to process what he'd just heard. After a long pause, he spoke again, his tone measured. Do you boys understand why this is unacceptable? They nodded. Yeah, Dad, Marcus said quietly. But what can we do? He's the judge. No one's going to listen to us. A small, determined smile tugged at the corners of Derek's mouth. That's where you're wrong, he said firmly. People will listen, and they'll have no choice but to act when they see the truth. Derek wasn't a man who let emotions dictate his actions. Instead, he channeled his frustration into strategy. Over the next hour, he sat with Marcus and Malik, asking them to recall every detail of the courtroom encounter. He jotted down notes, making sure he had a clear picture of what happened. When the twins finished, Derek thanked them and told them to focus on their studies while he handled the rest. As soon as the boys left the room, Derek picked up his phone and dialed a number. On the other end was Evelyn Carter, a close friend and one of the city's top investigative journalists. Evelyn, I need your help, he began, his voice low but urgent. He explained the situation without revealing too much, just enough to pique her interest. By the time he hung up, Evelyn was already digging into Judge Langley's background. Later that evening, Derek called another trusted ally, a lawyer named Samir Patel, known for taking on high-profile civil rights cases. Samir, I want you to review this case carefully, Derek instructed. I need to know if there's any precedent or evidence we can use to hold this man accountable. While Derek worked behind the scenes, Marcus and Malcolm couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. They'd seen their dad tackle challenges before, but this time felt different. There was a fire in his eyes, a quiet determination that told them he wouldn't stop until justice was served. For Derek, this wasn't just about protecting his sons. It was about sending a message. A message that no one, no matter how powerful or respected, was above accountability. And as he plotted his next move, Judge Langley remained blissfully unaware that his world was about to change forever. Derek Johnson wasn't a man who acted impulsively. He believed in precision, strategy, and timing. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, piecing together information that would expose Judge Langley's behavior without directly implicating himself or his family. His calm demeanor masked the storm brewing inside him, a storm fueled by both anger and purpose. The first step was gathering evidence. Evelyn Carter, the investigative journalist, wasted no time diving into Judge Langley's past. She uncovered unsettling patterns. Dismissive remarks during trials involving minority defendants, questionable rulings in civil rights cases, and even complaints filed against him by attorneys and court staff, all conveniently swept under the rug. Each discovery added another layer to the troubling portrait of a man whose biases seemed deeply ingrained. Meanwhile, Samir Patel reviewed the twins' case meticulously. While there wasn't much concrete evidence tying Marcus and Malik to the vandalism, Samir found glaring inconsistencies in how the investigation had been handled. The security footage used to implicate them was grainy and inconclusive, yet it had somehow been enough for an arrest. Worse still, eyewitness accounts from people who saw the actual vandals were ignored entirely. It was clear that bias, not facts, had driven the decision to bring the boys to court. As the pieces came together, Derek began orchestrating his plan. He knew going public too soon could backfire, so he decided to let the story unfold organically. With Evelyn's help, snippets of the courtroom exchange were leaked online. just enough to spark curiosity, but not enough to reveal the full scope of what was coming. Within hours, social media lit up with reactions. Comments poured in from people outraged by Judge Langley's tone and choice of words. Hashtags like #Justice or Marcus and Malik started trending, drawing attention from local news outlets. Judge Langley, however, remained oblivious to the growing storm. Life went on as usual for him. He presided over his cases, issued verdicts, and returned home each evening to his quiet suburban life. If anything, he felt confident about his handling of the twins' case. To him, it was just another routine matter, nothing out of the ordinary. He didn't bother checking the internet or paying attention to whispers around town. Why would he? He was the judge after all, and judges weren't accustomed to being questioned. But Derek wasn't done yet. He reached out to influential figures in the community, civil rights activists, educators, and business leaders, and shared what he'd uncovered. These individuals agreed to amplify the message once the story broke fully. They also pledged support for Marcus and Malik, ensuring the twins wouldn't face backlash for speaking out. One evening, as Derek sat alone in his study, he reflected on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about teaching Judge Langley a lesson. It was about dismantling the systems that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. He thought about his sons, their bright futures, their dreams, and how moments like this could shape them for better or worse. If handled right, this ordeal could become a turning point not only for their family, but for countless others facing similar injustices. By the end of the week, everything was in place. The groundwork had been laid, the evidence compiled, and the narrative carefully framed. All that remained was waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, Derek knew Judge Langley would have no idea what hit him. For now, though, Derek simply leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. Justice might be delayed, but it wouldn't be denied. The leaked footage of Judge Langley's courtroom exchange spread like wildfire. Within hours, the internet was ablaze with outrage. Social media users dissected every word, every pause, and every dismissive glance captured on camera. The video showed Marcus and Malik standing nervously before the judge, their voices trembling as they tried to defend themselves. And then came Judge Langley's fateful words, words that dripped with condescension and bias. "It's shocking," one commenter wrote beneath the video. "How can someone in his position talk to kids like that? It's not just unfair, it's wrong." Another added, "This isn't justice. This is prejudice masquerading as authority." Hashtags like #Justice or Marcus and Malik began trending nationwide, drawing attention from activists, celebrities, and even politicians. People shared personal stories of facing similar biases in courtrooms, schools, and workplaces. What started as a single incident quickly grew into a larger conversation about systemic inequality and accountability. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing clips of the courtroom footage alongside interviews with civil rights advocates. One prominent activist, Leah Monroe, appeared on a popular morning show to discuss the case. "What we're seeing here isn't an isolated event," she said firmly. "It's a symptom of a much bigger problem. Judges are supposed to uphold fairness and impartiality, but when they use their platform to demean and stereotype, it undermines the entire justice system." The pressure mounted rapidly. Calls for an investigation into Judge Langley's conduct flooded City Hall and the courthouse. Community leaders demanded answers, organizing protests outside the courthouse where the twins' hearing had taken place. Signs read, "Bias has no place in justice," and "Respect our youth." Parents brought their children to the rallies, hoping to turn the moment into a teachable one about standing up against injustice. Amidst the chaos, Judge Langley remained oblivious, at least at first. He continued his routine, arriving at the courthouse each morning with the same air of confidence he'd always carried. But soon, subtle signs began to creep into his daily life. Court staff whispered behind his back. Attorneys avoided eye contact or exchanged uneasy glances during hearings. Even the bailiff, usually chatty, seemed unusually quiet around him. Then came the first direct blow. A formal complaint was filed against Judge Langley by a coalition of civil rights organizations. The document outlined not only the incident with Marcus and Malik, but also highlighted other instances of discriminatory behavior uncovered by Evelyn Carter's investigation. Copies of the complaint were sent to the State Judicial Oversight Board, local government officials, and major media outlets. When Judge Langley finally caught wind of the growing controversy, he brushed it off. "People will forget about this in a week," he muttered to himself, scrolling through headlines on his phone. But as more evidence surfaced and public outcry intensified, ignoring the situation became impossible. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Judge Langley held a press conference. Standing stiffly behind a podium, he addressed the accusations head-on. "I admit my comments may have been misinterpreted," he began, his tone defensive. "But let me be clear. I am committed to fairness and equality in my courtroom. Any suggestion otherwise is simply untrue." His words fell flat. Critics pointed out that saying "misinterpreted" wasn't the same as apologizing. Others noted how his body language, crossed arms, clenched jaw, spoke louder than his carefully chosen phrases. Instead of quelling the backlash, his response only fueled it further. As the days passed, Judge Langley found himself increasingly isolated. Friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations to social events dried up. Even his own family began questioning whether he'd truly done nothing wrong. For the first time in his career, he felt vulnerable. A man who had spent decades wielding power now grappling with the realization that his actions had consequences far beyond what he'd imagined. While Judge Langley struggled to salvage his reputation, Derek Johnson watched silently from the sidelines. The storm he'd set in motion was gaining strength, and there was no turning back now. The charity gala was in full swing, a glittering affair held at one of the city's most prestigious venues. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over elegantly dressed guests mingling beneath them. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played soothing music in the background. It was an evening meant to celebrate unity and progress, but for Judge Richard Langley, it felt like walking into a lion's den. Derek Johnson stood near the center of the room, calm and composed as always. He greeted attendees with warm smiles and firm handshakes, his presence commanding respect without needing to say a word. As chairman of the event's organizing committee, he had ensured every detail was perfect, even down to the seating arrangements. And seated just 2 tables away from him, Judge Langley. For much of the night, Derek observed the judge from afar. Langley seemed out of place amidst the polished crowd, fidgeting uncomfortably in his chair and avoiding eye contact with anyone who approached him. The weight of the scandal clearly hung heavy on him, though he tried to mask it with forced smiles and polite nods. Finally, Derek decided it was time. He excused himself from a conversation and made his way toward Judge Langley's table. When their eyes met, Langley froze momentarily before standing awkwardly, unsure whether to extend his hand or not. Derek solved the dilemma by offering a firm handshake, his grip steady and deliberate. "Judge Langley," Derek said warmly, though there was a sharpness beneath his tone. "I'm glad you could make it tonight." "Mr. Johnson," Langley replied, attempting to sound casual but failing miserably. His voice wavered slightly as he added, "Thank you for inviting me." Without missing a beat, Derek gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. "Do you mind if we step aside for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Langley hesitated, his instincts screaming that this wouldn't end well, but declining would only draw more attention. So he reluctantly followed Derek to a secluded spot near the balcony doors. Once they were alone, Derek turned to face him, his expression unreadable. For a few seconds, he simply stared at the judge, letting the silence stretch between them. Then, in a low, measured voice, he said, "You may not know this, but Marcus and Malik, the boys you humiliated in your courtroom, are my sons." If Derek had slapped him across the face, Langley couldn't have looked more stunned. All color drained from his cheeks as he stammered, "Why, What? Yes, Derek continued, his tone icy now. My sons, the same ones you dismissed so casually, judging them not by their words or actions, but by the color of their skin. Tell me, Judge Langley, did you think no one would care? Or did you assume they didn't have anyone powerful enough to stand up for them? Langley opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His mind raced, searching for some way to defend himself, but everything he thought of sounded hollow even in his own head. Derek pressed on, his voice cutting like steel. Let me be clear. I don't need to raise my voice or make threats. My influence runs deep in this city, and I can ensure that your career, and perhaps more, is dismantled piece by piece if I choose. But I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing. Apologize sincerely, take responsibility for your actions, and commit to real change, not because I'm forcing you, but because it's what's needed. By the time Derek finished speaking, Langley was visibly shaken. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly at his sides. For the first time in years, he felt utterly powerless. I understand. He managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Derek studied him for another moment, then nodded curtly. See that you do. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Judge Langley standing alone, the weight of his mistakes pressing down harder than ever before. The days following the charity gala were some of the longest in Judge Langley's life. He replayed his conversation with Derek Johnson over and over in his mind, each memory gnawing at him like a persistent ache. For the first time, he couldn't ignore the reality of his actions or the consequences they had set into motion. The public outrage showed no signs of dying down, and whispers of an official investigation loomed heavily over him. It was clear he had to make a choice. Langley spent hours pacing his study, wrestling with his options. On one hand, he could dig in his heels, deny any wrongdoing, claim he was misunderstood, and hope the storm would pass. But deep down, he knew that path would only lead to ruin. His career, his reputation, even his personal relationships were already hanging by a thread. If he refused to take responsibility, it wouldn't just be the end of his position as a judge. It could mean legal repercussions, public disgrace, and irreparable damage to his family. On the other hand, there was redemption. A genuine apology might not undo the harm he'd caused, but it could show that he was willing to change. It wasn't easy for someone like Langley, who prided himself on control and authority, to admit fault. Yet, as much as he hated to admit it, Derek's words echoed in his ears. Commit to real change, not because I'm forcing you, but because it's what's needed. Finally, after sleepless nights and endless deliberation, Langley made his decision. He called a press conference, knowing this was his last chance to salvage what remained of his integrity. When he stepped up to the podium, cameras flashing around him, he looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the stern figure people were used to seeing in court. His usual confidence was replaced by something more fragile, vulnerability. I owe Marcus and Malik Johnson, and their father, an apology, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. What I said in my courtroom was wrong. I allowed biases I didn't fully recognize to influence how I treated them. And for that, I am deeply sorry. The room fell silent as reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Langley swallowed hard before continuing. No one should ever feel dismissed or humiliated in a courtroom, or anywhere else, because of who they are. As a judge, it is my duty to uphold fairness and justice, yet I failed in that responsibility. I failed Marcus and Malik, their family, and everyone who trusts our legal system to protect them. He paused, taking a shaky breath. I have begun the process of undergoing diversity training, and will work tirelessly to ensure that incidents like this never happen again. I ask for your forgiveness, though I understand if it cannot be given easily. The reaction was mixed. Some viewers appreciated the sincerity of his apology, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether it was too little, too late. Social media lit up once more, with debates raging about whether Langley deserved another chance. Civil rights organizations acknowledged his statement as a step in the right direction, but emphasized that actions would speak louder than words. For Marcus and Malik, watching the press conference felt surreal. They sat together on the couch at home, their father beside them, arms crossed as he observed silently. "Do you believe him?" Malik asked softly, glancing at his brother. Marcus shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "It doesn't matter if we believe him right now. What matters is what he does next." Derek nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the screen. "Your brother's right. Words are important, but they're only the beginning. True change takes time and effort." As the press conference ended, Judge Langley returned to his chambers, exhausted but resolute. He knew rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight. Every ruling, every interaction, every decision moving forward would be scrutinized. But for the first time, he understood the weight of his role, not just as a judge, but as a human being capable of growth. And somewhere across town, Derek Johnson watched the news replay with quiet satisfaction. Justice hadn't been served completely, but the wheels were turning. The road ahead would be long, but progress often started with a single difficult step. The weeks that followed Judge Langley's public apology brought a mix of emotions for everyone involved. For Marcus and Malik, life slowly began to return to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such a life-altering experience. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the incident left an indelible mark on them. They had faced prejudice head-on, stood their ground, and emerged stronger because of it. One evening, the twins sat with their father in the living room, discussing what they wanted to do next. Derek leaned back in his chair, watching his sons with pride. "You've handled this situation with grace," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. "But now it's time to think about how you can use this moment to make a difference, for yourselves and for others." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Dad, I've been thinking, maybe we should study law. If we understand the system better, we can help people like us who get treated unfairly." Malik chimed in, his eyes lighting up. "Yeah, and we could work with organizations that fight against bias in courts and schools." This whole thing made me realize how much work still needs to be done. Derek smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly the kind of mindset I hoped you'd have. You've got the strength and the voice to inspire change. Don't ever forget that." As for Judge Langley, the road to redemption was anything but smooth. True to his word, he enrolled in diversity training sessions and began meeting regularly with civil rights advocates to better understand systemic biases. At first, these meetings were uncomfortable, sometimes even painful, as he confronted truths about himself and the privileges he'd taken for granted. But slowly, he started to change. He became more mindful of his words, more patient in his rulings, and more willing to listen to perspectives different from his own. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Some colleagues praised him for taking accountability, while others remained wary, unsure if his transformation was genuine. Still, small victories began to add up. In one case, he ruled in favor of a young woman whose employer had discriminated against her based on race, a decision that earned praise from advocacy groups. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Meanwhile, Derek continued to advocate quietly behind the scenes. He partnered with local nonprofits to fund programs aimed at educating youth about their rights within the justice system. He also joined forces with civil rights leaders to push for reforms in judicial oversight policies, ensuring judges were held accountable for biased behavior. His influence helped spark broader discussions about equity and fairness, inspiring others to join the fight. The ripple effects of the scandal extended far beyond the courtroom. Teachers across the city incorporated lessons about bias and accountability into their curriculums. Parents used the story as a way to talk to their children about standing up for themselves and others. Even businesses began reevaluating their hiring practices to ensure inclusivity. Months later, the city announced its annual Unity Award ceremony, celebrating individuals and organizations working toward social progress. Marcus and Malik were nominated for their courage in speaking out against injustice, while Judge Langley was invited to attend as a guest speaker, an invitation that stirred mixed reactions among the community. On the night of the event, Derek watched proudly as his sons accepted their award, their smiles radiant under the spotlight. When Judge Langley took the stage, his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone. "I am here tonight not as someone who has all the answers," he admitted, his voice sincere, "but as someone committed to learning and growing. Mistakes were made, and though I cannot undo them, I can promise to do better, for my sake and for yours." The audience erupted in applause, signaling hope for the future. As Derek looked around the room, he realized something important. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating opportunities for growth and healing. And sometimes, the hardest battles yielded the most meaningful victories. The Unity Awards ceremony marked a turning point, not just for Marcus and Malik, or even Judge Langley, but for the entire community. As the evening drew to a close, Derek stood near the edge of the ballroom, watching his sons mingle with other attendees. They laughed and shook hands, their confidence shining brightly despite everything they'd been through. It was clear that this experience had changed them in profound ways, shaping them into young men who understood the power of resilience and advocacy. Nearby, Judge Langley sat quietly at his table, sipping water as he observed the crowd. He wasn't approached by many people. Some still viewed him with suspicion, but those who did engage spoke cautiously, testing whether his apology had truly been sincere. One woman, a local teacher, stopped by his table to thank him for addressing bias in his recent ruling. Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. "Change starts somewhere, and I believe you're trying. That matters." Langley nodded, gratitude flickering across his face. "Thank you," he said softly. "I won't stop trying. Not now, not ever." Though his journey was far from over, he felt a small measure of peace knowing he was moving in the right direction. As the event wound down, Derek found himself standing beside Judge Langley near the exit. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Derek broke the silence. "You've taken steps toward accountability," he said evenly. "That's something. But remember, actions define us more than intentions." Judge Langley met his gaze, nodding solemnly. "I understand, Mr. Johnson, and I'll continue proving myself through my actions. Your sons, they've inspired me in ways I didn't expect." Derek allowed himself a faint smile before responding. "Good, because they're going places. And so are we, as a community." Months later, life settled into a new rhythm for everyone involved. Marcus and Malik threw themselves into their studies, excelling in school and becoming vocal advocates for equality among their peers. Their stories spread beyond their hometown, inspiring students nationwide to speak up against injustice. They began volunteering with organizations focused on legal education, helping teenagers navigate the complexities of the justice system. Judge Langley, meanwhile, became an unlikely symbol of redemption. His rulings grew fairer, his demeanor kinder. While some skeptics remained, others acknowledged his efforts, noting how he often paused during hearings to ensure all parties felt heard. He even started mentoring younger judges, sharing lessons he'd learned about confronting bias, an unexpected twist few could have predicted. For Derek, the ordeal reinforced his belief in the importance of systemic change. He expanded his philanthropic efforts, funding scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in law and public service. His work sparked conversations at higher levels of government, leading to policy changes aimed at increasing transparency within the judiciary. One crisp autumn afternoon, Derek watched Marcus and Malik play basketball in their driveway, laughing and teasing each other as they always had. Despite everything, they were still kids at heart, kids who now carried a deeper understanding of the world around them. As he leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, Derek felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, but they had become reminders of growth rather than pain. Later that evening, Derek reflected on the bigger picture. Justice wasn't a destination. It was an ongoing process, a series of small victories and persistent efforts. What had started as a personal affront had blossomed into a catalyst for meaningful change. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but Derek knew one thing for certain. Progress was possible when people chose courage over complacency. And so, as the sun set over the city skyline, casting golden hues across rooftops and parks alike, hope lingered in the air. The fight for fairness was far from finished, but tonight, in this moment, it felt like anything was achievable.